Welcome to the CX Files. I'm Peter Ryan. The intersection between automation and CX has long been a challenging one to reconcile by customer management professionals. But the inability to make headway in this regard is likely to mean confusion, poor execution on the front lines, and lost customers. Today on the CX Files, we speak with Vistio's Hailey Corr, who's been a long-time observer of the automation sector. From her experience in a variety of roles, Hailey has managed to carve out some concise and logical approaches to best practices around the application of automation in the customer-facing world. In our chat, we discussed the evolution of automation in the CX space, what's worked well, what's not worked well, and the importance of implementation when deploying new automated projects. Let's go straight to the interview with Hailey. Today, the CX Files is delighted to welcome a longtime observer of the customer experience and outsourcing space, Hailey Corr, who is with Vistio, and she joins us from her home in Mexico. Hailey, it's great to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks so much for having me, Peter.
It's an absolute pleasure, and we're really excited to have a chat with you today about all things related to automation and the elements of automation that have been brought into the CX game over the course of the recent past, as well as, I would say, where these trends are going. So as a point of reference, as a point of starting out, Hailey, based on what you've seen and what you've witnessed over the course of the past decade, how do you feel that CX automation technologies have evolved? How would you describe their path of evolution over the course of the past 10 years?
Sure, that's a great question. Specifically, I wanted to talk about RPA. So a little over 10 years ago, robotic process automation hit the scene. And I think there were two reactions to it, probably more. But from the executive mindset, it was like, great, we're going to fully automate the job of the contact center agent. And then in the agent's mind, there was this almost panic that the machines are going to totally eliminate my job. And as we now see with the evolution of that specific technology, we're seeing that it really should be more about focusing that it's making the agent's job easier. Automation is handling the manual and repetitive situations, and it's more about intelligence augmentation, where the automation is working with the agent to make them better and more efficient, not necessarily taking over the job of the agent entirely. And I think that's really where we've gotten to in this moment.
I think that's a good encapsulation, Hailey, and I absolutely agree with you that when RPA really burst onto the scene as an expression and as a concept a decade or so ago, there seemed to be very, very different schools of thought. Some were looking to embrace it, and as you say, were championing the idea that the machines were going to take over. Others were highly resistant to it, and I do feel that we've come to almost a modicum of in between with regards to where this technology is moving. Hailey, in your opinion, what do consumers generally feel about automation if they're to hit an automated IVR over the telephone, or if they're going to be dealing with a chatbot, if they're doing something online? How does the broader customer segment feel about being serviced by machines?
I think for things like verification, getting to the correct agent, I think those are great places where automation feels comfortable for the consumer. I think where we're kind of missing the mark sometimes is when we expect, like I was saying, almost getting too aggressive with the automation, the expectation of the automation software and the RPA software that's out there. I think that's where we run into some issues as far as what the customer is expecting these type of automated interactions.
So then in that case, putting that into context, can you give me some examples? You gave the verification example a few minutes ago. What would be some other instances where you think that RPA has been properly deployed in the customer experience environment?
You bet. So I think from what I've even witnessed personally, it needs to start with data. So RPA is great for integrating customer data with with CRM data. You can gain better insight into customer inquiries and agent proficiencies, or areas where they need more training. I think this is a great start. Also, you can align that CX data that you're grabbing with the use of RPA with business intelligence data. You can do this cross-referencing. And then that then lets you get the customer service aspect of your business out of the silo and more into the broader enterprise strategy, which I think oftentimes there's a disconnect that we see happening in an organization between, say, even the CTO all the way down to the agent. We're seeing a disconnect between those. We're seeing a disconnect between the CX data being a part of the entire business data. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. No, that makes total sense. So thinking a little bit about this, thinking a little bit about how RPA can be properly deployed and what it can be used for in terms of enhancing the customer experience, what would be your counsel to organizations looking to implement an automated solution where perhaps they shouldn't do it? Where should some elements be where automation or RPA should not be considered in the customer journey?
Yeah, I think this is I think we can state the obvious. So we can delegate to bots, voice recognition software to automate tasks that are considered manual, repetitive, simple tasks. Like I said, authentication, getting the customers to the right department, things like that. I think what we shouldn't do is that we shouldn't be asking a robot to add that personal touch. I also think RPA is helpful for the workflow aspect of things. So tailored workflows that can be set up for different activities with tailored logic around them, and what you want to happen next when something specific occurs. If you give us your procedures, let's say, specifically speaking for Vistio, then we can create a workflow using RPA to automate that process, basically giving agents a roadmap to the correct question. So even not just the chatbot, but even using RPA to get your agent to the correct next step.
So thinking a little bit about what you've gone over in our chat so far, there's something that really strikes me, and that is when a provider is looking to work with a client around deploying a smart automated solution. And I don't mean smart from the standpoint of being powered by AI, but one that's logical, one that is tailored, one that is going to be straightforward and stress-free for the user. Hailey, how important do you see the role of implementation as a solution is being brought into an organization? What would be some of the best practices around implementation that you would highlight to any enterprise or outsourcer looking to take on an RPA solution for the first time, or to take one of these offerings on perhaps a follow-on from existing ones they already have in place?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple elements to this. I think oftentimes, and I know I do this too, I get really excited about a certain software, and I don't necessarily think about it always trickling down to what the real issues are. So making the wrong purchase, executives or the people in charge of purchasing the customer technology, they get over enthusiastic, like I said, about the latest tech without truly doing the research of what the organization needs. So you need to see what really is the issue. As the purchaser of that technology, you're not having a realistic grasp of what's really happening on the contact center floor. And I think that's a big thing. You need to go in and have a true, realistic view of what your agents are struggling with most. And that goes back to, we can use RPA and the data that we can grab from that RPA, comparing it to the bigger, broader data of our organization. And I think that's something that we need to look at. I think oftentimes we are looking at adding tech that doesn't integrate with your current tech stack. So you're just adding on to legacy systems, creating a mess of tools that are old, out of date,
Mm-hmm.
don't work together, difficult for your agents to navigate back and forth. That goes back to what I'm saying, when you really need to go to your agent and sit with them or have someone sit with them and see exactly how they're using your current tools, where their gaps are. And that's how you should look at purchasing. As far as implementation goes, I think you need to, this goes back to having good, clean data in place for the implementation, looking at software that will come in and help do the implementation process with you, not put a lot of strain on your IT department. Your IT department is already, organizationally dealing with a lot. So you want to have the software come in and almost hold your hand. I think also then you want to make sure that once they hold your hand in the implementation process, they don't just leave you. And maybe then you can call a customer service line and get someone on the phone or troubleshoot on their website, but that you have someone in the organization on the vendor end that's going to help you through your journey with that software.
Yeah, and I think that that's important. Having a trusted guide or a partner is just so crucial, especially as you were saying, and something you mentioned there really hit home with me. When you've got a lot of organizations that almost default to wanting to add new technology to old stacks, which is just really a recipe for disaster in so many cases. And we've heard, all of us in the CX industry, the horror stories of that. And that sort of leads me to the final question I was going to ask you about, Hailey, and that relates to automation and the agent. Now, we touched on that at the outset of our discussion. And to my mind, it's really almost the age-old query that we always get asked as analysts. What is that ideal intersection between the human interaction and the automated interaction, or the automated element? Because as you said, augmenting the agent experience is so important. If we were to think about the Indiana Jones holy grail of the intersection between RPA and the live agent, what would your counsel be around that?
Yeah, I think I always like to talk about the sweet spot. So the sweet spot is actually a threefold. It's process, people, and then and the technology. And if you don't have one solidly in place, then it's almost like a stool, and the stool falls over if you don't have one of these. And so that sweet spot is where you have clearly defined processes. Oftentimes we see the pitfall with implementation of RPA is that we don't have clearly defined processes, or they're not mature, they're not stable. We aren't sure of the last process change that was implemented. There are ongoing changes with the process that may affect the actual technology. So that's where the process and the technology come in. And then also we have the people aspect of it. So the technology and the process have to be aiding the person, and vice versa. The individual using that technology has to be well trained in the technology and have a great understanding of the process that it is augmenting or that it is automating. And those three stands of the stool are what keeps great customer service and not only great customer service, but efficient, effective, and consistent customer service occurring. So every time a person calls, all these three things, the people, the process, and the technology, are working together to support that every call is being handled in a unified way.
So then, as a bit of follow-on, I know I said that was the last question, but this one really will be, Hailey. How well do you see organizations on the whole achieving that three legs of the stool approach to what you're saying? Are most of them getting it right? Are most of them trying? Are not enough of them succeeding?
I think overall, I'd like to have faith and say yes. I think where oftentimes we're falling a little short is that we're not taking in the user experience into mind as much as we probably should. And like I said, that you're not, when you're implementing new tools like this, that you're not really looking at the individuals who are using it on a daily basis. You're thinking as a leader, great, I've got this new tool. I'm going to go ahead and throw it onto my tech stack, and it's going to improve my CSAT scores, and my agents are going to be handling things amazingly. When in reality, that's just probably not happening because you're not focused as much on the individuals who are actually using it. My favorite thing to always say is, CX equals EX, EX equals CX. So the employee experience, if that's great, then you're going to get great customer service. But in order for that employee experience to be great, you have to be giving them easy tools that they understand and that aren't complicated. And going back to the implementation, that the implementation is done correctly. And then also then your agents are trained properly on that without also overflooding their desktop with all kinds of tools, and they're toggling back and forth between screens and technology and different tools and softwares that you've given them that are supposed to help them, when in reality, there's just too much going on. And it's in fact hindering their ability to deliver great customer service.
Well, on that note, Hailey, we do appreciate your time chatting with us today about a topic that I don't think is ever going to go away, and certainly not a topic that's ever going to become more straightforward or simple. There's something about automation that is just inherently provocative, and there's something about automation that I really think brings all sorts of different opinions to the forefront, and we've certainly enjoyed what your opinions have been today. So thank you for taking part in the CX Files.
Thanks so much. This was great, Peter.
Thanks for downloading the CX Files podcast. If you have a moment, please give us a star rating or review on your favourite podcast provider, because this really helps other people to find the podcast. If you have any suggestions for future guests, or ideas, people or topics, then please just find myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan on LinkedIn and send a suggestion.